Ladies and gentlemen, our presentation is about to begin. Please take your seats. Welcome back to the second day of the 10th annual FAV Summit. Today's general session is being sponsored by our diamond sponsor, HNTB. And now, please welcome to the stage the Senator Jeff Brandes.
Good morning. You all have made it through the day one and survived night one, which is and made it here by 8:15. So we give you a little bit of grace the second day. But we're so glad you're back here. It's my honor this morning to announce the poster winners for the university posters. I don't know if many of you got the chance to see them. They'll be up the rest of the day, right around the corner. But our third place winner is Katerina Yelichuri from the University of South Florida. Our second place winner is Enoch Melobakwe from the University of North Florida. And our winner is Ladonna Kimbert from the University of Florida. So congratulations to our winners. I hope you all enjoyed yesterday as much as I did, and we're really excited this morning to kick off a great discussion about the future. And so I'm honored to introduce Beth Kigel from HNTB, one of our former Tony Oscar winners of the Florida Automated Vehicle Innovation Award as well. So with that, Beth Kigel from HNTB. Welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. I didn't realize my mic was already on. Good morning, everyone. It's amazing to see so many people up bright and early this morning. Hopefully you were also able to get breakfast before joining us this morning. Guess what? I just recently learned. This is actually the 10th anniversary of the Florida Automated Vehicle Conference. Can you believe that? 10 incredible years. And as you know, as we've been discussing automated vehicles over the years and other forms of emerging technology related to transportation that wraps all around that, this moves at an exponential rate. And I really want to thank Senator Brandes and the organizers, the various Expressway authorities for keeping it fresh every year. I know yesterday was really a great day. Looking forward to kicking things off, talking a little bit about planning for the future this morning, and also some really phenomenal breakout sessions that are going to happen after our opening session today. I'm Beth Kigel. I'm with HNTB, and just honored to be here and to be supporting yet another great FAV Summit. I have the honor of introducing Sheryl Connelly this morning. Sheryl served as Ford's chief futurist, and her responsibilities included looking at global trends, exploring potential implications, and leading discussions related to long-term thinking, planning, and strategy. I did look up what a futurist is, and there were a number of definitions, but they all pretty much coalesced around the same thing. A futurist is a person who studies the future and makes predictions about it based on current trends. I'm going to go back to that predictions element in just a moment. I do want to recognize Sheryl for something. She is very much respected throughout the industry. She's been recognized over the years for her expertise and influence. Two that particularly stood out to me is her recognition by Forbes magazine as one of the most influential women in futuring, and by Fast Company as one of the most creative people in business. And I know we'll see that come through in what she says this morning. Going back to predictions, we heard yesterday that it's really great if we can predict 2 years out. That's pretty good. But by 2030, that's probably pretty hard to do. But one thing that's for certain, the future is uncertain. And I actually took a little bit of time to look at a couple of Sheryl's TED Talks, which were really great. And I was intrigued by them and notions that she mentioned regarding the necessity to explore and embrace uncertainty, as well as having resilient strategies in the face of uncertainty based on what we're seeing today and current trends that we're seeing today. During her tenure with Ford, she also oversaw an annual survey, the results of which provide insights that informed key decisions that Ford was making relative to design of automobiles and other things surrounding that, other very strategic decisions going out to the future. And I know that the results of a recent survey were recently released, and I'm sure that we'll hear a little bit about that today. So without further ado, Sheryl, please come to the stage and share with us some of your brilliance this morning.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. My name is Sheryl Connelly, and I'm delighted to be here. This is my first official speech that I've given since I retired from Ford Motor Company. I was with Ford for 27 years, and 19 of those years I worked in this futuring role. And I love what Beth said about uncertainty. I would say that my definition of a futurist is slightly different. I think my job as a futurist is to remind people that no one can predict the future, but you can prepare, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the forces that are driving that. But I would tell you that even when we know inherently that you can't predict the future, we all do it in big ways and small. And as business leaders, community leaders, policymakers, all of you are trying to predict the future. And I hope when we're done today, you'll have a couple more tools the next time you're involved in a conversation about long-term planning, long-term strategy. But for instance, when you get married, people assume it's for a lifetime. When you make an investment, you assume it'll pay off in the long run. And for organizations, they tend to believe the thing that once made them successful will guarantee their success going forward. But of course, there are no such guarantees. So I'd love to start with this quote. I know that I have some friends here from Ford. They're probably very familiar with this quote. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Raise your hand if you're familiar with this Henry Ford quote. So I discovered about 6 months ago, Henry never said that. And it was really surprising to me. In fact, the person who said it was in the late 1990s, and it was a shipbuilder, and he was being asked about how he prepares, what kind of things he does to get ready for long-term planning. And he said, well, it's like Henry. If he had asked people, they would have said faster horses. And then it became kind of like marketing folklore in early 2000s, and ever since then, people have attributed to it. But we have a historian and an archivist, and they've looked it up, and they said there's no evidence that Henry ever said it. But it does appear he said this, and I think it's probably a little bit more on point. He said, if you don't think about the future, you won't have one. And I think that's really true, and that's why we're here today, is to talk about how do you prepare? How do you face uncertainty and still act in a very decisive manner? So I'm going to share with you 5 tips. 5 tips to think like a futurist. These are things that I learned over the last 2 or so decades in trying to prepare for this inevitable disruption that we're all going to face. So as already kind of I gave away the lead, when you think about the future, it's not about preparation. It's not about prediction. It's about being prepared. So by a show of hands, how many of you have ever gone to see a psychic? Oh, we got a couple people in there. I know there's always somebody in the room who has seen a psychic that did not admit it. I know you're out there. So for the few of you that raised your hands, did you have a good reading? Yes? Yes, good reading? So I have a twin sister, and about 25 years ago, she said she wanted to go see a psychic. And I said, oh my God, that is a horrible idea. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of money. And she said, lighten up, it's not like I actually believe. But the problem was I was scared for her. I was worried, what if they told her something she didn't want to hear? Because once you ring that bell, you can't unring it. And then secondly, because she's my twin, I figured that her destiny was my destiny. And she goes, just don't worry. She goes, I don't really believe, but I think it'll be fun. And she was right. We were having a great time. A tarot card reader flipped over one card after another relating each to her past, her present, and her future. But wouldn't you know, when we got to the very last card, the death card appeared. And my non-believing sister became a convert on the spot. She was absolutely certain it was an omen, a sign of things to come. We're on vacation when this happened, and it literally ruined our vacation. And I spent the days, the weeks, and the months to follow trying to reassure her that all would be fine. The reason, oh, by the way, she's alive and well. She is alive and well. But I often share the story because what I remember that day was this feeling like we had done something wrong. I mean, isn't the future meant to be a mystery and therefore best left unexplored? And I think it's a really good reminder that people are uncomfortable with uncertainty. It's just part of human nature. When you ask them to think about the future, most people start to bristle because you're talking about things they cannot control or influence. And so when you think about having a conversation about how do you prepare for the long term, that's one of the first obstacles that you're going to have to come over. When we do futuring inside a Ford Motor Company, we're looking for outliers. We're looking for those things that have a interesting extreme example, like abnormal events, and then we kind of imagine, what if that thing were to really escalate or take a turn in a way that we don't expect it to happen? So think about the first time that you heard about Uber. You know, the notion that you would get in a car with a complete stranger. It was really uncomfortable. And how many of you have kids? So my girls are in college now, but 10 years ago, I remember having huge arguments with them about whatever made it okay to get in a car with a stranger. But Uber took that and took it up, flipped it on its head. And if you were watching what was happening back in the day, there would have been an outlier, something that said, hey, most people think that's just an anomaly and we're not going to pay any attention to it. But it's in the outliers that you get a glimpse of what will be the biggest disruptors in the future. The third thing. If you want to think like a futurist, you have to be provocative. That means that you have to push back on the status quo. Now, ultimately, as I said, I tell people that no one can predict the future. And my job is to remind people that they're doing that in a very subconscious way. Every time you put together a plan, it's based on a set of assumptions. And those assumptions are so deeply rooted into your worldview, most people can't even question them, let alone identify them. So they're really struggling with myopia. They're thinking to themselves, this is the plan. And oftentimes these assumptions are based on the status quo. So if you want to think about what to look for when you're trying to be provocative, you want to listen to the people that say no, never, not my lifetime, not under this administration. And your job then is to try to ask them to entertain the thought, what if? Now the goal is never to prove anybody wrong. You're not there to say that I'm right, you're wrong. But what your job is to do as a futurist is to say, think through the consequences. What happens if the foundational elements of your plan are flawed? Will your business opportunity still work? Will your strategy be resilient? Will this be robust enough to weather anything that you can imagine going into the future? Oops, excuse me, I went too far. Okay, and you might want to look for wildcard events. So we're living in one of the most dramatic wildcard events of modern days, COVID. Now, wildcard events are those things that have a low probability of occurring, but when they do occur, they have a high probability of changing the human condition. So COVID notwithstanding, let's talk about things that have been major disruptions in the last decade or two. There was the Icelandic volcano. How many of you remember the volcano that erupted across Europe? Then the year after that, there was the earthquake and tsunami in Japan. You guys remember that? Now, these two single events are really interesting to me because they seemingly caught the world by surprise. But the question is why? The volcano, for instance, it's been active since the early 1900s. What was unique in 2010 is it's the first time that the eruption was so strong that it pushed the volcanic ash into the jet stream. And by doing so, it disrupted air travel across the continent of Europe for 2 weeks. With regard to the earthquake and the tsunami, also something that shouldn't have been all that surprising. Anybody who's familiar with the geography of Japan knows that it's always been, always will be vulnerable to earthquakes. And inside of Japan, they had done a great deal to kind of mitigate potential damage. The problem was it was of such great scale that it totally obliterated many of the systems in place. But what's even more problematic than that was that businesses that relied on Japan for natural resources, for technological support, for manufacturing assistance, never thought about what happens if Japan has an earthquake. Large companies, including Ford, were feeling the effects of that earthquake 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years after the effect. And we see that playing out with COVID today. COVID's another thing that I would tell you that could not have been predicted, but it most certainly should have been anticipated. Anybody who's been paying attention to the World Health Organization for the last 2 decades would know that they've been sounding a warning bell for quite some time. In early 2000s, you had SARS, followed by avian flu, swine flu, Ebola, Zika. And so these are those sort of outliers, those dramatic events. Unlikely to happen, but when they do occur, they will dramatically change the landscape. When I started doing trends and futuring, one of the lessons I saw play out in the most ugly fashion was you want to push back against the status quo. You want to upend the institutional norms. You want to question orthodoxies throughout an organization, but you have to do it in a way that brings other people along. In fact, when I tell people that I'm a futurist, I find that I get a lot of pushback. And I think that we would probably be better served if we refer to ourselves as polite contrarians, to ask people to kind of think about, if their decisions are going to take them in the wrong direction. But in terms of balancing provocation with plausibility, when I first started with Ford's trend team, I worked with a young woman who was really smart, quick on her feet, and she prided herself on being the most provocative person in the room every time she gave a presentation. And so early on in our career, I followed her into a meeting, and at Ford Motor Company, 20 years ago, I think it's balanced out since then, it's a heavily male-dominated industry. So we're talking to a room full of mostly men, male engineers, and she says, I've just come across an article that says 500,000 years from now, the male species will be extinct. No, I am no mind reader, but based on the faces of the people in the room, they were thinking to themselves, who is this nut job and how do we make sure she's never invited to another one of our meetings? So it's one thing to be provocative, but it's meaningless if you cannot bring people along with you. It's a slow and iterative process. It requires extreme patience. I think there's something like you have to hear a data point 8 times before it sinks in. So when you're talking about the future, you will find yourself getting frustrated, but it will take time to kind of get people to start thinking differently. One of the nicest things about my role at Ford is that for 10 plus years, I would attend the annual TED conference. And if any of you have ever been to TED, the name tags are about 6 times the size of the name tags you're wearing today. They're like giant billboards. And on one occasion, another attendee came up to me and he said, oh, I see you're the futurist for Ford Motor Company. You must be very frustrated. And I was like, oh my God, how does he know? How does he know? And so I said, well, what would make you say such a thing? And he said, well, you work for a very old company, and change inside of a large organization is always going to be challenging. The other thing is that it's large. Getting a lot of people to kind of pivot is going to be even more daunting. Even when a tanker knows it's going in the wrong direction and needs to turn, it goes several miles down before it can even bring itself to a stop. And finally, you're asking people to think about the future, and that's going to make them uncomfortable. He said, but the truth is, he goes, if your job were easy, you'd be a volunteer. You're paid to be frustrated. And on so many days, I would go, oh, I really earned my money today. I really earned my money today. But I love this notion because it's not easy work. I mean, futuring sounds very exotic and it takes people into all kinds of different directions. But being that polite contrarian can be frustrating. Constantly pushing back on people to rethink their plans is not for the faint-hearted. Okay, so how do you keep your provocation balanced with plausibility? We do this by talking about trends. And inside of Ford, when we think about trends, we have a very specific definition, because trends mean different things to different people. Here's how we define it. Every single person in this room has their own unique set of values, and your values were established in your late teens and early 20s. This is kind of cohort theory, but the notion is that for the most part, once those values are established, they're pretty stable and constant. They're enduring. Doesn't matter how old you get, where you live, what life stage you're in, or what lifestyle you adopt, those values will stick around. And anybody who has a parent or grandparent that grew up in the wake of the Great Depression, you can see this playing out. They pay for things in cash. It's about delayed reward, self-sacrifice. In my father's case, it was about hoarding food. We had like a 5-month pantry in our basement long before there was ready.gov. But these are the things that were formative to them. And when we talk about trends, we're talking about some external force, a social, technological, economic, environmental, or political force that is causing society's collective values to shift. And as you might imagine, they don't change that often. We talk about macro trends, things like aging. Aging, the way that the aging population is unfolding at this moment in time, we'll be dealing with the ramifications of that for 2, 3, 5 decades. But I'd like to turn your attention to what we call micro trends. So when I started doing this work for Ford in early 2000s, we never talked about our trend work publicly. It was a sort of thing I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you sort of topic. And the idea was that it was feeding directly into our strategy and that we shouldn't publicize it. But over the years, the team morphed, it got smaller, and we actually had to go outside to ask people for more points of view. And the thing we discovered is that the more we shared, the better the work became. So 11 years ago, we started publishing an annual trend report, a micro trend report, with things that were on the horizons, the ones to watch. And instead of being 3 to 5 decades, this is 3 to 5 years. Now, I always talk about these trends, micro and macro trends. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. A micro trend can grow out to be a big, strong macro trend. It's just a little too early to tell. But what I thought I would do with our time remaining is talk to you about the results that we have from our latest trend report, the things that we studied around the world. So we did surveys in 15 different countries, and we tried to find out what was top of mind for consumers. And since we've been doing it for a couple of years, it's not a tracking study, so we don't ask the same question year after year after year. But we did start to repeat a couple questions. In 2017, we asked a question about being overwhelmed. And much to our surprise, 66% of the people surveyed told us they were overwhelmed by changes taking place in the world. I mean, that's two-thirds of the global population feeling overwhelmed. A couple years later, when COVID struck, we thought, I wonder how much higher that number could go. So in the middle of 2020, we repeated that question. Raise your hand if you think it went up 5 points. 10 points? 20 points. It went up 3 percentage points. Shocking to me. Shocking that you can go from 66 to 69% in the advent of a global shutdown, an unprecedented pandemic, worries about the impact of the economy. Why would it only go up 3 percentage points? Now, we don't ask why questions. A lot of what we do in terms of futuring is we speculate. And the theory that we came up with is that consumers have been living with this low-grade fever of anxiety for a very long time. Change and disruption has become part of our daily diet, and people are feeling fatigue from that. And this indeed started to come out when we did our most recent survey. What we found is that almost 6 out of 10 people told us that they were feeling burnout in life in general. 6 out of 10. When we repeated that question about being overwhelmed, I think we went 66 to 69, and now we're down to 68. But again, that high anxiety, the constant stress is really starting to play out. So it's very sobering to us, but the thing that we found is that people still have a fair amount of optimism. They know things are bad right now, but they expect them to get better. In fact, the majority of people that we spoke to said that 5 years from now, they actually think society will be stronger than it is at this moment in time. And I love this idea, because what it's telling me is that every cloud has its silver lining, and people still believe in their notions of happily ever after, but for the meantime, they're just going to have to settle for the silver linings where they can find them. So these are the changes that we talked about, people being overwhelmed. Our numbers, 66, 69, and 68%. We started to wonder, what are the things that are overwhelming people? Technology is certainly an ambivalent mainstay in our life. We love it and we hate it. We can't live with it. We can't live without it. How many of you ever thought your phone was ringing or vibrating when it wasn't? Yes, you are in very good company. About 90% of university students and emergency medical providers have reported this phenomenon. No, nobody knows exactly why, but there are some early hypotheses that this might be a form of anxiety. What we're doing is training ourselves like Pavlovian dogs to constantly be on the ready, waiting for the incoming message, the new text, the post, some news alert that's going to change our day. And so this is totally changing the way that our mind operates. A couple years ago, there was an interesting study that found that human beings have a shorter attention span than goldfish. Well, goldfish have a stunning 9 seconds. 9 seconds of focus, and human beings have a mere 8 seconds. Now, if you're like me, you're like, wait a minute, how exactly does somebody test that? And so there are lots of credibility questions that come along with that. But it's intriguing for sure, but there are other studies from early 2000s that found that human beings' attention span was 12 seconds. So during the advent of smart devices, we have eroded our attention span by a third. This notion about technology, we're constantly addicted to technology, but we're not ready to give it up. A couple years ago, we did a study that found 1 in 4 millennials would rather give up their sense of smell than give up their digital devices. Okay. So what's happening when we're spending all this time on our digital devices? There's a lot of data being accumulated about us. 73% of people actually find it creepy when a company knows too much about them. I mean, there's something delightful when it's easy and streamlined and simplified. For instance, when I call Delta Airlines and they recognize my phone right away, and they're like, hello, Sheryl, what can we do for you? But there are other times when it feels a lot more intrusive. One of the things, and it's interesting because we're in this moment of the holiday season, you might find yourself shopping for a loved one online, and you'll make a decision, you'll buy the purchase, but I can guarantee for days, weeks, maybe even months to come, you will continue to see advertisements for that same item that you bought. And somewhere along the way, if you're like me, you're gonna go, oh, darn it, it was cheaper. It was cheaper at this place, or I could have gotten a higher quality or more advanced technology version of it. And so these things are also undermining our satisfaction, our sense of contentment. Barry Schwartz is a psychologist who talked about the paradox of choice, and he said that our confidence in the decisions that we're making are being eroded because of these constant messages that are coming up to us. We found, interestingly enough, in our surveys in 2020, this epidemic of loneliness. It was pretty widespread. The numbers were shockingly high. In a country like the United States, I think we had 38% of adults saying that they were lonely on a regular basis. That meant at least once a week. That was troubling, but not nearly as troubling as it is in India, where over 70% of people said that they were lonely on a regular basis. How is that possible that the country with soon to be the largest population could be so lonely? You know, anecdotally, I've asked a few people that are familiar, grew up in India. They said perhaps part of the problem is that there are a lot of multi-generational homes. And so people live together, but they don't always feel seen, heard, or understood by one another. And this is where we see polarization becoming even more problematic. On the whole, my initial thought was the reason we see so much loneliness is because of the aging population. People are outliving their loved ones, their children are moving away, they don't get to spend the quality time they want with their grandparents or grandchildren. but I couldn't have been more wrong. The highest number of loneliness happens for Generation Z, those people 18 to 25 years of age. 64% of them say that they're lonely on a regular basis. That's almost twice as much as it is for a baby boomer. The American Journal of Pediatric Medicine, I believe it was, did a study, and they looked at 19 to 30-year-olds, and they found that the more time they spent on social media, the more likely they were to suffer from some sort of mental despair, if you will. In fact, those who spent more than 2 hours a day on social media were twice as likely to report anxiety, loneliness, or depression than those who kept it to less than 30 minutes a day. So social media, you have a lot of mixed feelings here, and we asked this question, what category does social media fall in? 20% said it's harmless, it's just fun entertainment. 29% said it's toxic, and another 20% said it's a total waste of time. Since retiring from Ford, I've had to eliminate my TikTok account because I can lose myself for hours at a time just watching this steady stream. And again, they're often 30-second snips, sometimes 3 minutes, but 30 seconds, and it's just we're lowering our engagement for a shorter period of time, making it harder to focus or do deep thinking analysis. Okay. I thought there were more slides than that. Okay. Yeah, there were definitely more slides than that. There were definitely more slides than that. Okay, so let me tell you where we are. So I think I've given you four tips, right? It's about preparation, not prediction, watch the outliers, be provocative, balance provocation with plausibility. And the fifth one is to connect the dots. Connect the dots. It's to look for all the things that you see on the horizon and start asking the what if. One of my favorite things to do in scenario planning is to do, one of my favorite things to do in futuring is to do scenario planning work. Have any of you done any scenario planning? I love scenario planning. I think of that as like the college level version of futuring. But they're stories, they're fictional stories about what life could be like in the future. And you look at the trends to kind of create your story. Better said, you can think about the trends that you're watching as the ingredients, and the scenarios are the many meals you can make with it. But in this case, when you're thinking about the future, what you want to do is push it to the extremes and start thinking about what is the absolute worst case scenario that you can imagine, and how does that compare to the best case? So if you naturally inclined to see the world through rose-colored glasses and that you believe in the future, global peace will be achieved, we'll eradicate world hunger, disease and poverty will come to an end, it's a big kumbaya moment, then you also have to match it with the exact opposite, a story of widespread suffering, increased disease, loneliness, apathy, dissension, disconnection, social upheaval, a crumbling of the infrastructure, a loss of governance, an Armageddon of sorts. And the point of doing this is to then put your plan through a stress test and say, hey, can my plan or proposal weather either end of these extremes? Typically you do 4 of them, but if you, just to keep it simple, if you do 2. And if you can imagine, if you can come up with a business idea, a plan, a proposition that works on either end of the extreme, then you don't need to know the future. You just know you have a really good plan in place. So this is how to think like a futurist. I am going to invite my new friend Beth to come up, and we're going to have a little moderated conversation. Thank you.
Okay. And that is, maybe all your slides aren't here, but I have some wonderful information from your report I'm actually going to ask you about. So we might be able to fill in some of those blanks. I don't know if you were going to go there, but I'm going to start pretty much right off the bat. First of all, that was great. And what I love about these kinds of conversations and presentations is you really get all of us to think outside the box a little bit, and other things that might impact our decision-making down the road, and things that we should think about. What I found interesting when I looked at the trend report, you touched on a lot of these things, like you mentioned loneliness, social media, things of that nature. But there are also items in the report that I think many in this room can directly relate to, such as how many people are considering purchasing electric vehicles, for example. And it may be surprising to some, but in the US, about 33% of men, 36% of women. Another statistics, 86% of people find joy by being in their car.
I love that number. I love that number.
Right?
So I'd like to talk about that because I want to tie some of these things together, connecting the dots, speaking of that. So you have 86% of people finding joy. You've got 64% of young people saying that they're lonely on a regular basis. One of the things that was interesting is that for Generation Z, again, the youngest audience that we looked at, 18 to 25, many of them said that they actually enjoy sitting in their car listening to music more than they enjoy driving their car. Like the car as a hub, as a space of community is really important. The other thing that we found in our research was that over 50% of people of all ages told us their best conversations take place in the car or during long road trips. And so I think the way that we think about the automobile and the role it has in our daily life is really interesting. Oh, one last tidbit. In the middle of COVID, we found 1 in 10 people told us they hide in their vehicle. They hide.
That's great. Well, in thinking about this information that comes out of the trend report, so the ones we talked about are probably a little bit, the ones that we just talked about, a little bit more relatable. In your role at Ford, in talking about other things, right, such as social media, loneliness, just feelings, basically, how are you able to communicate that and the importance of that to leaders at Ford as they were trying to make these pretty impactful decisions going forward?
So most of you will notice, hey, somebody from Ford's up there and they're not talking a ton about cars. I am not an automotive expert, and I think that was part of my value in the company was I work with hundreds of thousands of people that love cars. I mean, it's not uncommon for people at Ford to say things like, I bleed Ford blue, oil runs through my veins. I mean, they're adrenaline junkies, they're gearheads, they love their vehicles. And so my role was to bring to light things that they probably were not looking at. And my hope, as it is today, is that I can give you some of my expertise, and you'll match it with some of your expertise, and together we'll discover something that you wouldn't have discovered otherwise, something new. And so that's how it worked with the engineers, with the leaders, marketers, HR, IT. We would bring in different examples. So when we talked about loneliness, one of the things that we found were countries that were trying to combat loneliness. So I think in the UK, they formally created some sort of bureau to combat loneliness. In China, they created a loneliness museum in Beijing. And it was just interesting to talk about how people were coming together. And so Total Strangers, one of the things they could do is they sat side by side in these stationary bicycles, and they could, once they started to pedal, it would generate images on a screen that only could be done by connecting with somebody else. So it's just those things, understanding how we might leverage that knowledge and make the experience better.
Well, you know, and as I was thinking this through, look, I started in the world of finance, you know, so I have to ask this question in this way. You know, many of us that are involved in business, and I'm sure many in this room, we've engaged in, we're very familiar with SWOT analysis, you know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we always think about, in particular, opportunities and threats as looking into the future, right? This is a bit different. I know you've been doing this with Ford. It's 15 years. Did I get that right?
19.
19 years.
Well, yeah, 19 years in the futuring role.
19 years in the futuring world. How were you able to take, you know, that basic construct of, you know, basic business principles and looking into the future? I mean, it struck me when you talked about the gentleman who approached you and you talked about turning the oil tanker, and boy, you must be really frustrated and whatnot. What was the catalyst for Ford to kind of, I'm sure SWOT analysis is still prevalent there, but in taking it this next step and looking at things in a completely different way.
So I too come from finance. I actually have a bachelor's degree in finance, so I get the draw to numbers. And it's worth spending a minute on that, because what happens when you work with quantitative data is that it'll give you really precise pieces of information and data points, and that often leads to a false sense of confidence. Because anytime you use historical data to predict the future, it's a bit like driving down the highway using your rearview mirror to guide your journey. And particularly with all the disruption that we're talking about, you know, there are things that are unprecedented. They will not be part of your historical model. I was lucky after I got my finance degree. I don't know if it's lucky because it was really just a byproduct of coming of age during a recession. I went to law school, and then I still couldn't get a job, so I worked on my MBA at the same time.
I skipped the law school part, and I went right to the MBA.
So in hindsight, what happened is that the finance degree taught me the business fundamentals. The MBA taught me how to apply it. But the law degree taught me how to do the reasoning and try to make up a persuasive argument, particularly when you're talking about something that's abstract and intangible, trying to say, hey, this is something you really need to pay attention to. But the thing that probably prepared me the most, and for those of you that work in the public sector, you know, you have to sell your ideas. And your ability to read if your audience is buying what you're selling is important. For my first 5 years with Ford, I wholesaled cars to dealers. And so trying to understand, are they buying what I'm selling? And so today, when you do futuring, you have to communicate to an engineer, to a software developer, to a designer, and they all process information differently, but the message substantively has to be the same. And so that's, I think, how we, you know, try to work on making sure we meet people where they're at.
Yeah, I can certainly appreciate that. And I want to give an opportunity for any questions from the audience. I want to just take a moment. Do any of you have any questions for Sheryl? Well, keep those thoughts, because I'll give you another opportunity in just a moment. But I thought, since, you know, originally Alex Roy was going to be moderating this morning. I don't know if you know Alex, but many do. And he always asks a provocative question. So I thought this morning I would channel my inner Alex Roy a little bit, but I'm not going to go quite that far. But I do have a specific Ford question for you. You know, Ford has been going through this incredible transformation, from the announcement of transitioning to ultimately to fully manufacturing and selling electric vehicles, to restructuring around that concept, to the billions of dollars of investment in manufacturing facilities around this. How did your work inform this? And, you know, were you in the room when it happens, where it happens when these kinds of, you know, incredibly strategic and transformational decisions were being made for Ford?
So I can't take credit for any of that. The question I often get asked is, people will say, well, can you point to something on the car? Like that you as a futurist said, hey, here's what we need to do, and as a result, the company did this. I'm just one person on a very small team, and so it's a very collaborative effort, and it would a little bit be like trying to take credit for something that came out of a brainstorming session. There's a lot of iteration, and I think more importantly, nobody would invite you back if you were taking credit for certain things. But I'm proud to be part of the process. I'm very, very proud to be part of the process. And again, I can only take my ideas so far, and then a subject matter expert inside of Ford has to translate it into an opportunity, into something that we think is compelling. And sometimes we use it on the front end and it drives innovation, but we also use it on the back end to explain the decisions we made. So for instance, if you think about an aging population, I can give you endless stats about aging population. In the United States, every 7 seconds another person turns 65. In the coming years, there'll be more people over the age of 50 than under the age of 50 throughout the EU. And this is only going to continue because science has declared the first person to live to be 150 has already been born. I don't know if it'll be you or me or Jeff, you know, but maybe our children or our children's children. And so the problems associated with aging will continue. Physiologically, you still have reduced response time, impaired vision, limited range of motion. And so Ford has long been engineering vehicles to prepare for that. Like if you have elderly parents or grandparents, you know when they enter a car, they usually shuffle backwards. They lead with their butt, then they get into their seat, and they kind of swivel into the vehicle. And because we know this, because we've observed it, we've lowered the lip of the vehicle. We've made the door wider. And then we have something called a third age suit, where engineers can mimic the effects of aging. It's like a full body thing where they can see that they put weights around their ankles, they lose dexterity in their fingers, they mimic glaucoma with their glasses. And so a 30-year-old able-bodied engineer can step into the body of a 60, 70, 80, or 90-year-old and kind of design around that. And so bringing those things together, like saying, hey, they might discover it and they go, is there a business case for it? I can come and say, well, the numbers are this, 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 and this. The trend line suggests this. So it's a collaborative, it's a team sport.
I think that's really fascinating to actually have engineers or designers try to experience what it might be like to make it much more germane when you're thinking about how do you actually design or structure something. I had no idea Ford did anything like that. I think that's really incredible. And I will say, the statistics around the aging population here in Florida, we can directly relate to that, because we have, I want to say it's upwards of 25% of our population is 65 or older. And the whole concept, as we talk about autonomy and the independence that it can bring, that's why your statistics on loneliness in terms of those that are getting older in the years, it wasn't as surprising to me because of also that the ability to leverage these technologies for independence.
Yeah, I think when I think about autonomous vehicles, where's the business case lie? I think one of the most compelling cases is the aging population. You and I talked about this before. Like, if you have aging parents or grandparents, raise your hand if you've ever had the misfortune of taking keys away from somebody you love because they've gotten too old to drive. It is traumatic for all parties. And it's not just that you're taking away their transportation. What you're taking away in a more subtle but dramatically more significant way is you're taking away a sense of dignity. They no longer get to decide where they go, when they go, how they go. They're totally reliant on somebody else. And so the promise of what AVs could do somewhere in the future, it could totally change that. It could change it. It could allow people to age in place. It can enrich their lives in ways that are still difficult to imagine.
I think it's so important for us to relate the work that we do in our industry to how it actually has impact on people. So let me ask you this. We are at the end of our time, but you've given us a lot to think about, Sheryl. Is there anything, any key point, anything we didn't cover that you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Well, I love to remind people that no one can predict the future, but you definitely can create it. If you want to predict the future, then the best chance of doing that accurately is to create it. And I think it's events just like this. It's the kind of visionary leadership of someone like Jeff that all come together. Collectively, you come to a conference like this because you're trying to drive a future that's different from what it is today. And I'm wishing you all kinds of luck.
Thank you so much, Sheryl. This was really great. I mean, it really helps us think outside the box in the future. And thank you for your travels down here.
My pleasure.
Late last night. It's been a pleasure to get to know you better. And, I think that concludes our opening session. And let's all give Sheryl a round of applause. And enjoy the rest of the day.
And now for our next panel, please welcome Torin Spencer, Electric Vehicle Specialist for the Electrification Coalition.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our morning session. I know it's a little brisk outside, but good to see you all here. This is our big rigs on the road to resiliency, medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification in Florida. Again, my name is Torin Spencer, EV specialist with the Electrification Coalition. We are a nonprofit that works to electrify all forms of different transportation. With me here, I have Celia Kosinski, Josh Cohen, and Pete Westlake. Celia is a policy manager for the Electrification Coalition policy team. Her focus is on policy research and analysis to help policymakers create ambitious opportunities and strengthen the case for transportation electrification. Celia holds a master's in energy and environmental management and GIS from the University of Connecticut. Pete Westlake is the manager of new products and services at Orlando Utilities Commission. He launches new strategic programs and initiatives at OUC. OUC is a vertically integrated municipality that serves electricity and water in Orlando, parts of Orange and Osceola counties. Pete is the program manager for smart cities initiatives and beneficial electrification, including transportation. He serves on boards for several state and regional committees for electrification of transportation, including Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, or THEA, Drive Electric Florida, the EV subcommittee for the Florida Electric Power Coordinating Group as well. And last but not least, Josh Cohen serves as Shell Recharge Solutions focal point for policy and regulatory engagement, federally in a number of states and in the eastern United States. His priorities include growing the market for transportation electrification, enhancing the value proposition of electrification through software-based managed charging, interoperability, and open protocols, promoting equitable access to EV charging too. Before joining Shell Recharge Solutions, formerly Greenlots, Josh served in policy and communications roles at SEMA Connect and Business Network for Offshore Wind. In addition, he hosted the Clean Energy podcast, More Power to You, and Offshore Wind Insider. He served in public sector leadership positions, including as mayor of Annapolis, Maryland, and as deputy administrator for the Rural Utility Services during the Obama administration. So 3 great panelists up here with me as well, and a little bit of audience participation. By a show of hands, how many of you out there are either fleet managers, fleet organizations, work with a government agency or utility, or currently thinking about or operating medium heavy-duty EVs in your industry right now? Few. All right, that's great. Great to know. We are going to get into some presentations now. I believe Celia is up first, so everyone, Celia Kosinski.
Good morning. All right. So I'm just to kick off the panel here, I'm going to give a brief level setting of the Florida medium and heavy duty electrification market with some key summary indicators with our partnership through Atlas Public Policy. And I'll just advance the slide there. All right, so the Electrification Coalition, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We are dedicated to driving policies and actions that will electrify all modes of transportation to protect economic and national security, public health, and American jobs. And through the data collection that I've compiled here, this is a partnership that we have with Atlas Public Policy. They're one of our partners, and they are a policy tech firm that created a hub called EV Hub, which is a platform created for stakeholders within the EV industry that has a number of market updates regarding the electric vehicle industry, policies and regulations, and what's going on in the EV community. So to just get right into it, just going to talk a little bit about the medium and heavy duty deployments in Florida, some of the funding opportunities, and policies related to EVs in Florida. Okay, so here are some quick data points just to establish the Florida medium heavy duty EV indicators. So at this moment, as of 2019, there are 744,000 medium heavy duty vehicles on the road in Florida. That's 5.3% of the national total. And with the new registrations, which represents new vehicles registered from 2020 to date, we have 182,000. 0% of those are electric. And then a number of utility investment programs, and this refers to transportation electrification in general, not specific to medium heavy duty. And then if we go over to the alternative fuel vehicles section, we can see that the CNG is leading right now in the medium heavy duty space. And then following that is propane with 756, and then we have 24 electric. And then for policies, I'll get into a little bit more of this later, but there are 4 supportive policies, and this does refer to transportation electrification generally, and there were 0 bills passed in the 2022 session. And then lastly, the government funding. There's quite a bit of government funding, not only through the state, but there's a lot coming down through the federal funding opportunities, but right now 122 million awarded with 445 vehicles committed. And Florida has actually used 100% of their VW funds. So as mentioned, there are nearly 750,000 medium heavy-duty vehicles on the road in Florida, and as you can see by the graph here, by vehicle class, these are mostly class 2B to 3, and then medium heavy-duty vehicles by use case, mostly vans and trucks make up that area. So Florida does lead all states with 147 million dedicated to EVs from the VW settlement funds. If you look on this graph all the way to the left, Florida is all blue, and that represents electric. So they have invested 147 million into EVs from those funds. And as you can see, the other states following behind do have a number of investments in diesel and other fuels. And just to kind of set the scene for the policies that are occurring across the nation. So back in December 2021, we did see an uptake in the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. Following California, there were 6 other states that have either proposed the adoption or are planning to adopt the rule that will increase the proportion of medium and heavy duty EV sales. And then just this past March, following an executive order, the EPA released a proposed new medium heavy-duty fuel economy standards starting in 2027. And then just this past August, the Inflation Reduction Act was signed, which has an unprecedented amount of funding for medium and heavy-duty EVs. All right, and then Florida has a number of great investments within the utility sector. These are mostly made up of Duke Energy. We do see, though, FP&L has created a commercial pilot that has dedicated $25 million to the medium heavy-duty space, and then Duke Energy following has a number of rebates for DC fast chargers for trucks and forklifts, and then in addition to that, bus chargers, school bus chargers, and transit bus chargers. Okay, so for the federal investments, I'm just going to walk through a little bit of what money's available in the medium heavy-duty space within the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. So within the medium heavy-duty space in the IIJA, there's quite a bit of funding dedicated to the medium and heavy-duty vehicles. So the $13.2 billion for the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program, and then a re-up of the $5.6 billion for the low or no emission bus grant program, and then the $5 billion for the Clean School Bus program. So just this past September, 4 school districts in Florida are going to receive $12 million to purchase 30 electric school buses. And then more federal funding coming to Florida. So as we may have heard yesterday through the NEVI workshop, there's $198 million for an EV charging network to be deployed in Florida. And they just got approved for $39 million for that first year. And then additional money coming down, there'll be $320 million to reduce transportation-related emissions, and then $364 million to increase the resilience of its transportation system. And then lastly, through the IIJA, there is a competitive grant program which makes up $2.5 billion, and Florida is also able to apply for that to continue to deploy charging within communities in low and income areas. All right, I think this is my last slide. So just to kind of tie it all in, the IRA is supporting a lot of medium and heavy duty uptake. There is a number of programs that are brand new and going to just be able to deploy more medium heavy duty vehicles and charging within Florida. And most notably, I think those tax credits, the $40,000 for the purchase of clean commercial vehicles and the $100,000 for the infrastructure will be immensely impactful for Florida communities. And then I just want to say thanks to everybody for, just wanted to set the scene here before we get into the questions. And feel free to scan that QR code. We have a number of resources related to transportation electrification, and just want to say thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Good afternoon. I know we're a little bit behind, so I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly. So if there are any questions, please see me after the session. But just to ground you a little bit, I'm from OUC, the reliable one. We serve Central Florida for utility, water, lighting services. I am the program manager for electrification, so I've been working at that for quite a while. We are one of the larger municipalities in the state of Florida and the nation. Our electrification program was birthed in 2010, if you can believe it, where we started with a grant that installed EVSCE across our service territory. But we rebirthed it, or we reimagined it in 2020, looking at a pretty significant investment in electric vehicles, recognizing the fact that this is a great load that we're talking about here, $45 million, to make sure that we push for a 5% penetration in our service territory. And that means approximately 35,000 additional electric vehicles in our service territory. This is going to be done through charging hubs, through education centers, electric infrastructure, commercial fleets, and residential. What I'm here to talk to you about, and it was really a nice setup for the future, is preparing for the future is pretty significant. And you have to take a look at what's next. As far as I'm concerned, the residential market is happening. It's going to happen organically whether we push it or not. But the next big one that we're dealing with is commercial hubs. What you're seeing on the left-hand side is an actual one that's installed in Portland, Oregon, where you can see that large rigs can get in there and get their charge without worrying about that trailer that's in behind. But what you're seeing on the right-hand side is a concept in Bakersfield, California, which is a wave stop for between Los Angeles and San Francisco. And that's going to be hopefully put in place to serve 250 vehicles. That's what we need to talk about, and that's what we need to prepare for. So if we look at commercial fleets in our service territory alone, which is only 2 counties out of 66, there are over 5,000 fleets that exist in our service territory, representing about 120,000 vehicles. Much easier for me to convince a fleet manager that serves 100 vehicles than it is for me to talk about a person who is doing one at a time. So I have to have 120,000 conversations to convince our residential population to go over, versus probably about half of that or a third of that to get into commercial fleets. So this is a huge opportunity, but we got to do some stuff to prepare for that. We need to be able to give our fleet operators the ability to test the viability of battery electric vehicles without making a huge investment in their footprint. We need to provide opportunity charging, because those box trucks just do not have the type of range that we're talking about yet. So they need to be able to get into high-speed charging stations to be able to serve if they go beyond that 125-mile range. And we also need to get electrification-ready yards together for our fleets so that they don't have to make that investment. They can get into a yard that makes sense. There we go. And it's intuitive, but I'm going to state it. Fleet electrification is complicated. Where's the location? Is there enough power? Can I actually turn my trucks in that area by putting in 50 charging stations all of a sudden? Or am I going to take about 2 of them out every time I make a truck turn? What type of charging do I need? Do I need level 2 overnight? Do I need level 3 because it needs to get back onto the road immediately? What's the duty cycle? When do I have to have them back in service? And can I reimagine my operations to surround electrification? So what I'm going to talk to you about today is we're planning for a statewide commercial ride and drive event. We're hoping to host that in fall of 2023. So we've already started several months ago. We've engaged the Electrification Coalition to help us with that. There's 4 stages to this. The first is outreach. And basically what we're going to do is, and we're in process right now, we're calling every one of those fleet managers to find out where they sit today on the spectrum of changing over to electrification and garner their interest in going to a ride and drive event. Our hope is that we'll start in Tallahassee and work our way all the way down to Miami for this. We are getting some pretty good interest in that, so I want you to be aware this is not something that people are ignoring. Second stage is education. Between now and probably August of next year, we will be doing a series of webinars for these fleet managers who have an interest in our service territory, educating them on what they need to know, how they need to do a business case, what kind of power infrastructure they need, all that sort of thing to bring them along with that. The next stage is analysis, and this just shows you one of the toolkits that the Electrification Coalition has, and that toolkit allows us to load in someone's existing fleet, take a look at the total cost of ownership, and see what types of fleet vehicles we can transition to, and gives them a little bit of an idea of how they can put their business case together. We're gonna conduct that drive tool. We're going to provide potentially some telemetrics, so something that you can plug into the ODB port and actually take a look at what their ICE vehicles are doing today so that we can accurately reflect the type of driving that's going on in their vehicles. We'll help them develop a procurement plan and installation, maintenance, and financing, and so forth. So we're trying to get them prepared for the actual event where we'll be bringing the vehicles in, and that's the ride and drive event. Again, we're hoping to start in Tallahassee and work our way all the way down to Miami, and because it's that large an event, we're hoping that a lot of the vendors that are in this room are actually going to come over and talk to me and be part of that event. Because we will be in all the major centers within a 2-week period to demonstrate what is available and what is happening. So that's what I've got for you today. Thank you. You're up.
All right. Good morning. I'm just going to sit in my seat because I have a single slide for Shell Recharge Solutions. I'm not going to read the slide, but I'd just like to offer 3 main takeaways that I hope folks come away from this panel with. So first, about Shell Recharge Solutions. A number of folks may be familiar with the EV charging company Greenlots. Greenlots provides the software, has provided the software management platform for all of Duke Energy's park and plug charging stations in Florida, a number in Orlando, and across the country. Shell, that we're all familiar with, acquired Greenlots 3 years ago. So one of my main points I hope folks take away is that major historical oil and gas majors, some of them are getting into electric mobility in a big way. Shell itself has a global ambition to deploy 500,000 charge ports by 2025 and 2.5 million by 2030. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is that for folks who are wondering if medium and heavy duty electrification is real, I hope you come away from this panel recognizing that it is here already. Some of the policy shifts that Celia covered, some of the market developments that are happening. If you think about a hockey stick, for the past decade or so, electrification, and particularly medium and heavy duty electrification, has been increasing at a slow rate, but we're at this inflection point. So past adoption rates are not at all going to be predictive of future adoption rates. It's going to happen quickly. And so the third point is, whether you're a fleet manager or operator, whether you're a municipality, whether you're an electric utility, if you're not thinking about it seriously and preparing for it, it will be in your interest to be thinking about how you either begin to operate electric fleets yourself or how you begin to accommodate them. And for energy geeks in here, I just want to give one factoid. Some folks may have seen that Pepsi took delivery of the first Tesla electric semi-trucks. There are a lot more players in this industry than Tesla, but Tesla's the most notable one. So each of those semi-trucks, Tesla's also deploying charging stations for them that can deliver power at around 900 kilowatts, so close to a megawatt for a single charging station. For folks who don't speak kilowatts, if you think about the Empire State Building, all of the electricity that building uses peaks out at around 9 to 9.5 megawatts. So 10 megawatt chargers, comparable to the electric load that the whole Empire State Building can use. So the implications are enormous, and picking up on a couple of the bullets in Pete's presentation, the ability to manage the charging is going to be critical for any number of reasons. So I'll pause there and look forward to whatever time we have left for the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you guys for your presentations and information for our audience here. A couple questions for you guys. I'll start with Pete. What are the challenges or barriers to medium heavy-duty electrification in Florida?
So I think Josh just mentioned one of the big ones, and that is being able to serve that. But probably one of the bigger areas, for us at least, is identifying fleets. They're not our typical large-scale customers that we look towards. We have Universal Studios in our area, so we have a key account manager assigned to them. But in our service territory, these fleets are probably operating in a little hut on a gravel lot. We're not really paying attention to them. So sourcing them, finding them, understanding how to get power to them, and then making sure that it's resilient power, because there's nothing that's going to go well if at 8 o'clock in the morning the fleet is not ready to go out on their deliveries.
Right. Celia, same question to you.
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier really right now is the high upfront cost of the vehicles. Data has shown that medium and heavy duty electric vehicles are 2 to 4 times as much as the diesel equivalent. And not only that, but the charging infrastructure. It's also shown that we need about 160 billion to be making up for that charging infrastructure if we want to get to 100% medium heavy duty EV sales by 2040. So I think those are the kind of major areas that are the challenges right now for a lot of fleets.
And I will just add one more to Pete and Celia's comments. Model availability has been a big challenge in medium and heavy duty space particularly, but that will be changing as more and more manufacturers invest, particularly in domestic manufacturing, both on the vehicle side and on the charging infrastructure side. Another big challenge, but also an opportunity, is what I mentioned about managing the electric load. So from a utility standpoint, as Pete's been saying, like, the utility needs to think about all these fleets, what the implications are in their service territory if these fleets electrify, how they'll serve that load. But if you're a fleet manager or a fleet operator, the ability to manage when and how your vehicles charge can be the difference between making it economically viable or not to convert vehicles to electric vehicles.
Right. Thank you, Josh. Pete, question for you. What can utilities do to increase medium heavy duty EV adoption?
So what we're looking at doing is creating, not to the spectacular level of Bakersfield, California, where they're talking about 250 trucks, but we're looking to see if we can install commercial high-speed charging hubs where we can gain that opportunity charging, but more importantly, that we can offer to a fleet, like say the parking spot that wants to try out electric vehicles. Go ahead and try out an electric vehicle. We'll charge you on that lot, and you won't have to do your infrastructure until you're sure that you want to go in there. So again, we would look to an OEM vendor to help provide that test vehicle so that we can get people used to what the operations are.
And just to add on to that, I keep coming back to the money part of it, the funding. That's going to be difficult, but as shown in my slides, you know, Duke Energy has invested a lot of money into providing rebates and making sure that there is building out of charging infrastructure. But on top of that, you know, it's not only money that's going to make it, but we do need the planning. So we need to make sure we're planning for this infrastructure because these vehicles are coming, and you know, we need to make sure we have infrastructure in place for them.
And I would agree and just add one more key point, which is that in addition to the incentives, in addition to the education and the planning, complementary utility policies and programs are going to be really important when we think about all the federal incentives that are coming down, the $7.5 billion nationally for EV charging infrastructure, all the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. A lot of those will incentivize the actual charging stations themselves, but how is the grid going to support the electric load that those have, and who's going to pay for that? And from a regulatory context, that really implicates a need for stakeholder-based conversations at the Public Service Commission with the utilities to ensure that that infrastructure can be built. The supporting infrastructure.
Right. Thank you, Josh. Question for Pete and Celia. What is resilience, or how does resilience come into play thinking about medium heavy duty electrification?
So that one's interesting. What we look at, we've actually looked at studies that show that people don't necessarily evacuate all the way from Florida up to Georgia to get out of the way of a hurricane. What they do is they evacuate inwards. So they go inland to get away from the face of the storm, and then they try to get back to their property to assess damage and so forth as quickly as possible. So what we think we need to do is to create mobile units, like a big battery on a trailer, that we can expand our charging hubs that take people inland. So if you've got a station that only supports 5 or 6 or 7 high-speed charging, there's enough real estate there that we can pull in that sled and expand it to 16 or 17 charging stations, and that way we can deploy them wherever we need to within the state. So mobility of that resilience is significant, but also every one of those charging stations needs to have the capacity to put generation on that area, whether it's from battery storage or whether it's from a generator. It doesn't matter. It needs to have the capability to plug in when they need it.
Right.
And I think going off of that, regarding the mobile charging units, we've seen with FDOT's NEVI plan, they have a section in there on resilience, and they mentioned that it'll be important to be addressing that with this NEVI funding of deploying these charging stations. And in addition to that, the Florida EV Master Plan that came out in 2021 also addresses the mobile charging units. So we're thinking about it, and it's definitely the right angle to kind of reach when it comes to making sure that we are resilient against natural disasters. But on top of that, I think that vehicle-to-grid technologies are going to be significant for the medium heavy-duty space. You know, these vehicles, with these large battery packs, are going to be able to power back to the grid, and they can really enhance resilience efforts.
Excellent. Josh, question for you. What charger types are needed for medium heavy-duty electrification?
So it depends is the short answer. For folks who are familiar with EV charging, and there's a number of vehicles out in the lot for display, a lot of vehicles, medium-duty vehicles, can charge on a level 2 charger. A number of, not all medium and heavy-duty vehicles are Class 8 semis. A bunch of medium-duty vehicles are delivery vans. They can certainly charge on level 2 chargers. So it's a mix, and again, it goes back to understanding the vehicle's needs, the duty cycle, the dispatch cycle, as Pete mentioned, thinking holistically about the fleet operation overall in conjunction with the charging, in conjunction with your electric load. But yeah, it's a mix.
And just to add to that, you really need to plan with your utility when you can charge. So it's really important that you're charging off-peak because you'll get the best rates that are there. But then you need to have managed charge come into play to make sure that by the time the charging cycle is done, your fleet is ready to go. And so it's real important to take a look at those types of situations.
And I'll just add to that, I think as well as ensuring that these charger types are available, we need to make sure that there is the rate design as well. So ensuring that there is, like you said, a time of use kind of rate design plan for medium and heavy duty vehicles, and we can see the benefits of that as well. The data has shown that the revenues generated from charging medium and heavy duty vehicles can actually put a downward pressure on ratepayers. I think we get a lot of questions these days saying, well, we're going to have all these vehicles charging, it's going to increase rates, but really it's going to put that downward pressure across all ratepayers.
So as long as it's in that off-peak, it's actually sweet load for us because we've built to do the peak. We can actually fill in with equipment that's already there. And we're actually working with our partners in Lynx to see if we can come up with an equivalent per mile of driven for electric vehicles so that it's not variable month to month.
Excellent. And actually our final question, what are some considerations of how we will see NEVI deployment fitting into Florida?
So we really thank our partners at FDOT because they have been awesome about reaching out and listening to what we need to accomplish. They've had listening sessions and they've reflected that in the plan. So we're seeing a very well thought out master plan that's happening. We don't see in our service territory that the first round of funding for NEVI will apply to us because we've built out quite a bit and it really doesn't show up in our service territory. But the next one, where we get into secondary roads, which was a great add to that plan, I got to tell you, is going to be significant in the uplift.
Yeah, and I think the major, it popped out at me looking at the NEVI plan was all of the alternative fuel corridors that were designated and how exciting that is not only just for Florida, but for these resiliency measures as well, and making sure that there is a emergency preparedness aspect to it as well. And I think that, FDOT, I have to say, they did a great job with this NEVI plan. It really is a robust plan, and I'm really excited to see, this first year of funding that they're receiving and how that's going to be deployed. But I do think we need to continue to have these stakeholder engagement sessions to ensure that this charging is deployed successfully and efficiently. And I also, going on top of that, I think with the NEVI funds, not only is the charging available on the alternative fuel corridors, but really thinking about that competitive grant funding as well. As Florida really needs to start thinking about, okay, we're going to build out the alternative fuel corridors, but we also need to start thinking about those communities that might be, not having that charging or not be applicable for those locations.
And I'll also echo the kudos for FDOT and April and her team. Florida's lucky. Your Department of Transportation really intentionally had a very stakeholder-based process, very transparent and inclusive in putting together your NEVI plan. I want to focus on an implication I see for the charging space overall from NEVI, which is that NEVI from Federal Highway Administration has a bunch of minimum standards and requirements for these federally funded charging stations, including 97% minimum uptime. Uptime has been historically a challenge for the industry, mainly because not enough thought and money was paid attention to in terms of the operations and maintenance. And so I think even though the federal standards only apply to the NEVI funded or the federally funded projects, I think they're going to have an industry-wide impact where all the major players are going to set up their products and services that they can comply with these standards. And I think that's going to have a really beneficial impact to support EV adoption across the board.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Josh.
Torin, can I just add one final thought?
Yes.
I mean, if you got nothing out of this presentation, you should be taking away that the next major planning event that happens here is commercial fleet adoption. And it brings along with it a lot of implications. When you talk about residential, when I walk up or when I drive up to a Electrify America site and it's not working, I can complain. I'm going to talk to a customer service rep and I'm probably going to whine for quite a while. But that's just one event, and there may be multiple, but it's just not going to address the situation. But in a commercial end of things, if that fleet manager can't get if Pepsi can't get their product out to the stores the next day, that's going to be a big event. So resilience of this network is going to be significant as we come into commercial.
And I'll just add a final thought as well. I think that the medium heavy duty space is going to be so beneficial to the Florida market, not only with the benefits from air quality, but for jobs and the economy, and these vehicles coming to Florida. And we've seen so many auto manufacturers already making commitments to electrifying their fleet. So it's just a really exciting time. And like Josh had mentioned, it's moving fast, and we need to be ready for it.
And I'll add one final thought, not to sound too salesy, but if you're listening to this and you're like, good grief, how am I going to tackle all this? You don't need to tackle this on your own. There are experienced industry partners. Shell Recharge Solutions has worked with a number of major logistics and delivery fleets around the country, many names we're all familiar with. And so not just us, but other companies. I encourage you to do your due diligence, reach out, but you don't need to go it alone.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much for all this great information. Thank you for this excellent discussion. And thank you all for spending your morning with us. We really appreciate it, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
And now for our final general session of the morning, please welcome your moderator, Bernard Schmidt, Vice President of Automation and Innovation at the Jacksonville Transportation Authority.
All right, good morning. First of all, I think congratulations are in order to Senator Brandis and the entire FAV team for what has been so far a very informative and collaborative FAV summit. My name is Bernard Schmidt. I'm with the Jacksonville Transportation Authority. I'm going to spend a little time talking to you about what we're working on. And then we have two other speakers. I want to introduce them now. They're going to come up and sit with me. And we're hoping to have enough time here at the end to take a few questions and actually be collaborative with you all. So, first I want to introduce and bring to the stage Greg Slater. Greg is the Executive Director and CEO of the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority, THEA, a dynamic transportation agency that owns, manages, and operates the Selman Expressway, Meridian Avenue, Brandon Parkway, and the Selman Greenway, with over 200,000 daily expressway commuters and thousands of pedestrians utilizing THEA's urban trail networks. Mr. Slater envisions building a transportation system foundation for the next generation, a roadway of the future, and creating partnerships that will make transportation in Tampa Bay safer and more efficient. He is committed to bringing the best technology and the most progressive concepts possible to address transportation challenges. Slater's distinguished career spans more than 2 decades as a public servant in various transportation modes, most recently serving as a secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation, MDOT, where he oversaw 17,000 lanes of highways, 2,500 bridge structures, and toll facilities, including 2 tollways, 2 tunnels, and 4 major bridge structures, a local and community bus network, and a light rail metro system, commuter rail, and paratransit services. Please welcome Greg Slater. Next, please welcome Michelle Maikisch. She's the Chief of Staff and Public Affairs Officer for the Central Florida Expressway Authority. Michelle is the Chief of Staff and the Public Affairs, Officer for the Central Expressway Authority, a 125-mile expressway system serving the nearly 80 million residents and visitors traveling throughout the 5-county region each year. A seasoned communication and public affairs official with over 21 years of experience, Michelle is the linchpin of the agency's chain of command and guiding strategic direction and service excellence across every facet of the agency. She is the strategic partner to the executive director in the day-to-day operations and provides counsel to the governing board. Michelle joined the agency in 2008 and continues to be a driving force behind some of the industry's award-winning projects, such as overseeing the public engagement of the Wekiva Parkway, leading the development of the agency's first performance-driven strategic business plan, and most recently, directing the innovative ePass product distribution on Amazon. At its December board meeting, CFX named Michelle as a successor for the retiring executive director Laura Kelly. Michelle will assume the position of CFX executive director March 1st of 2023. A proud Seminole, Michelle earned a Bachelor's of Arts in Communication from Florida State University and is a member of Women in Transportation, WTS, and the International Chief of Staff Association. Please welcome Michelle and congratulations on your appointment. Please take a seat, guys. Again, my name is Bernard Schmidt, Vice President of Automation Innovation with the Jacksonville Transportation Authority. I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you today about what we have been working on. And I think you'll see some common threads with my peers up here in terms of some of the things that we're doing and how we're trying to advance mobility through innovation and transformative mobility solutions. It dawned on me when thinking about all of our shared interests and thinking about how organizations, as well as transit authorities such as the JTA, are trying to advance in this arena. It's clear that one of the things that we're trying to get to is this mobility ecosystem. Now, this up here was created by a transit planner out of MIT, and this is kind of his vision of what he thinks should be the mobility ecosystem. And regardless of what you feel, what's clear is that all these organizations are really trying to get to this utopia. And what it really starts for a lot of us is with having the right plan. And for the JTA, that is our Move 2027 strategic plan. That strategic plan really lays out our vision and our strategies on many initiatives around sustainability, innovation, resiliency, and much more. When you think about ACEs, automated, connected, electric, shared, mobility solutions, and innovations, for the JTA, that is very much anchored in the U2C, the ultimate urban circulator. If you haven't gotten tired of hearing about it, you're going to hear a little more. And so the U2C really is our vision of how we repurpose existing infrastructure in downtown Jacksonville and leverage autonomous vehicles and emerging technology to really create this expansive 10-mile system. What you see on here in orange is the existing 2.5-mile, 8-station system, which is our existing Skyway, an automated people mover system. Our vision is how we start to expand that by creating at-grade extensions where we start to basically go into these various neighborhoods and start to interconnect them through the downtown core. Now, believe it or not, what you're seeing here is the original vision of what was imagined for the Skyway, but never really came to fruition. And so the U2C really now brings that vision to fruition. And so when looking at this, it's also anchored east and west, connecting the JRTC, the Jacksonville Regional Transportation Center, and really terminates at an NFL stadium in TIA Bank Field. Now, the vision of the U2C was really birthed with the dilemma of what to do about the Skyway, an aging system that's going through various states of obsolescence. And, you know, under the leadership of Mr. Ford, a committee was convened, and it was decided not only we want to keep this, we want to retrofit it, we want to expand it, and we want to take it to the next level. And so what you see on here is our U2C program really kind of developed on how to create this 10-mile system into 3 major projects. The first one is the Bay Street Innovation Corridor. The Bay Street Innovation Corridor is what you see here before you in blue. It is the first leg of that extension that starts to expand our existing Skyway system. It is all at grade. It's about a 3.1, 3.2 mile system. And it's going to provide that east and west connectivity to the emerging sports complex and all the development that is happening on the east side of Jacksonville. Now, we are blessed because when we look at the second phase, which is the Skyway conversion, this system was originally built to be a roadway at elevation. So we are returning it back to its fit, form, and function. And so you can imagine APMs are actually a lot heavier than what we would see in any shuttle or vehicle that we would put on that roadway. And so recreating that roadway at elevation gives us our own dedicated roadway and allows us to repurpose this infrastructure, which was key in winning our build grant. And of course, last is the neighborhood extension. Now, the last thing that I'll say about this is we are probably the only transportation authority in the country that has some type of funding associated with every single project in this program. The first project, the Bay Street Innovation Corridor, is fully funded and underway, $51.1 million. If you haven't had an opportunity to see some of the exhibitors, please pass by on this final day. But I know yesterday a lot of you got a chance to see our approach on cybersecurity, the construction, fiber, the vehicles, and the whole gamut. But today, I want to kind of lean in on how did we get here? What did it take to really get to putting this together, to getting our requirements, and also really share with you the challenges. Because as I talk about this ecosystem, I know that the challenges itself, it's almost its own ecosystem. And so we've all been talking about it. I was listening to the previous panel talk about electrification and charging. And that's an issue that we're all gonna have to face as well. So for us, we really started out by building what we call the Test and Learn program. The Test and Learn is almost its own department under the Automation and Innovation, but really was charged by Mr. Ford to look at all innovative and creative solutions for the JTA. Not just autonomous vehicles, but how we try to leverage technology across everything that we do. Of course, the premier thing was, the U2C, and so we leaned in. We started with really trying to do this as demonstrations to socialize the technology with the public. We had a test track, close to downtown in TIA Bank Field where we were doing that, but it became very, obvious that we needed to really engage with these OEMs. Why? Because it was clear that they really didn't quite get what we needed in a vehicle for public consumption as a public transportation authority. We understand what it takes to move people. We move people on ferries. We move people on our BRTs, on 40-foot buses. We move people on our connections, paratransit, beachside buggies. You name it, the JTA does it. And really, I'll tell you, if it was up to my boss, he would really want to rename it the Regional Transportation Authority, because for us, we're really serving the entire region of Northeast Florida. But we really had to now lean in and imagine, what are these vehicles going to look like operating on Bay Street? And so very quickly, we put out what we call the Golden 20, the 20 critical requirements that we boldly said to the industry, this is what we need you to do to really support public transit. So it addressed things like ADA. It's not just a wheelchair. You need to address the hearing impaired and the seeing impaired and so on and so forth. And so we were allowed to lean in even further and really kind of use one of our facilities and convert that into our own R&D facility, where you see here we've brought a variety of different vehicles. If you hadn't had a chance to experience the demo, we brought out the EV Star. You saw our latest Polaris Gem solar-powered vehicle. We operate the Local Motors Ollie. We've operated Navia, the Easy Mile. We've operated 8 different vehicles across 5 platforms. I don't believe any other public transit authority has done that. We then leaned in even further and created our own test protocol. We built a battery of tests where we basically test these vehicles and provide test reports to the OEM in terms of, here's where you need to improve your vehicle. Of course, Mr. Ford has taken it further and said, think about how you're going to use your creativity and the innovation in your team on everything that we do, because we really have a holistic approach. You know, even in one of the things that's part of our pedigree is building roads and bridges, is thinking about how we have this complete street approach. And so we went in and installed traffic cabinets and sensors, pedestrian sensors, flood sensors, analytic cameras. And so we've mimicked what we expect to see on the Bay Street Innovation Corridor. We then even used our indoor facility, and believe it or not, we are now trying to launch indoor localization. Why? We have a lot of people that are interested in how these vehicles are going to drive right into their lobby and through their building. Simple, innovative solutions like 3D crosswalks, trying to basically get the intersection to be safer. At our test facility, you'll see all of our intersections are 3D crosswalks. And so these are some of the innovative things that we've worked on. The last image that you see here, of course, we were selected by Goodyear to exclusively be their test bed for the non-pneumatic tires for autonomous shuttles. And so we're very proud of this, but this is all the things that we leaned into and had to do to get there. Now, we're still without challenges. And there are a lot of challenges that I've attended a lot of breakout sessions, and we've all have been talking about them, from electrification to, you know, socialization of the technology. But I want to kind of hint on three big ones that I think I've heard over and over again throughout this conference, and are things that I think we're actually going to have to lean in further. Some of those challenges for us, because believe it or not, the Bay Street Innovation Corridor plans to launch on a level 3 platform, but our mandate is we will go level 4 in mixed traffic. So the first one, of course, is legislation and policy. I think we're blessed in the state of Florida under the leadership of Senator Brandes in terms of the things that have been done, but as you saw yesterday in that map, that is not every state in the country. And that is a problem when you start to think about what we need to have happen here. Certainly, I think also, you know, at the federal level, we've all have been having this conversation on the FMVSS. And the FMVSS really addresses just the vehicle. It is a safety standard that just addresses the physical vehicle from the perspective of a human driver. And so, is there a need to develop what I call an AVSS, an autonomous vehicle safety standard? At some point, that's probably going to need to happen. Of course, there is a separation here, and I have a planned date with Alex Roy to discuss this. You know, there's also this notion of the actual tech stack, the actual driver. Because today, right, we all get licensed in our various states and get reciprocity to drive across the 50 United States and some other countries, but who is going to regulate the actual autonomy? Now, in a separate conversation with Senator Brandes, I think he shared and really leans in on, can the insurance industry really be the proxy for this? And that's kind of an innovative thought. But I will tell you, I think some of the pushback that I get from the insurance providers, and we have a pilot that we do with an insurance company, is it takes them an enormous amount of time to underwrite and understand what that particular driver is, right? Because your insurance premium is determined by the vehicle, the driver, and the geography, primarily, and what you're gonna do as a function of the three. So, you know, today, if you go and you call your insurance company, you say, I got a teenage son and and an SUV, and you know, you're gonna get a much higher premium than an older person living in Florida than if you were to do, you know, a teenager in Brooklyn, New York, for example. And I was that teenager in Brooklyn, New York that had that call one day. So today, you know, we also have the issue of the software and the tech stack are constantly being updated. Constantly. Imagine just like your iPhone, every time you do that software update, that is a new driver. So where's the road test? Who's road testing and saying that that driver is okay? And so that is, of course, and we live in a litigious environment, and so that is something that we're gonna have to address. And you know, yesterday there was a breakout panel addressing kind of the regulatory piece and what is the path forward. And there was a couple of good things that really came out of that. You know, and so for us also, for folks that use federal money and deal with the FTA, we're going to have to also kind of get to understanding some useful life considerations. And then, of course, I think, it came up yesterday at a breakout session, a path towards Buy America. Because let's face it, in many ways, some of our European counterparts are much further ahead. And, I think the way to really think about this is, think about what happened to us with the chips. COVID hit. For some reason, we had vended this out, and there was 2 or 3 chips that apparently are common to everything we do in life, and we all almost came to a standstill. And so, today, I think what we're looking for and looking to kind of bring this technology into the United States, we have a lot of European vendors and OEMs that want to bring this here. And so I think a path towards that Buy America compliance as we leverage that to help set up manufacturing here. There's no doubt that we believe in Buy America. There's no doubt that we want this as a path. We know EV is going to help, build plants and build jobs. To me, this is really about Build America. It's a phrase that was coined yesterday again at that same panel, but this is what it's really about. But I think we're going to have to come up with creative solutions on how we now, become the exporter of technology, bring this in, build it ourselves and do it, rather than always be the #1 importer of certain things. And so there's some conversations to be had with that. So I think overall, legislation and policy is an issue. We've talked about it. It's been a big part of this conference. I've had an opportunity to have really good discussions with a variety of different people about it. I think the other thing that needs to be addressed, and the JTA is probably even leading in this area, is workforce development. I think, we boldly say we believe in the employee, not necessarily the job. And so we have open conversations with our team about you might have come to the JTA as a bus operator, but you might end up as a remote control AV operator. Now, that's some years away. But at the end of the day, this notion of, this technology is going to be what kills us all, not there. In fact, I think you're going to see higher paying jobs. You're going to see more jobs come online. And so, we've leaned in at all levels. You had an opportunity to see these kids that joined us yesterday. And so, again, or the day before. And so, our partnership with DCPS, where we're doing monthly STEM programs and monthly activities. We also had a partnership with BEEP and FSCJ, the Florida State College of Jacksonville, where we've partnered to create the first autonomous vehicle curriculum. And proud to say that very recently it received accreditation. And so that is big for us to also address the workforce development piece. Because let's face it, I think if you talk to a lot of folks, that are in transit entities, there's a lot of pressure to go green. I've, talked to a few folks that said, look, we're being pressured to go out and upgrade our fleets. I was at a recent TRB session in Washington, and a few folks shared with me, they said, there's a lot of pressure to just, go do that. And I don't think they have an actual issue doing that, but where are we with the workforce development? Where are we with the infrastructure for charging and electrification? I can tell you today, if we at the JTA were to go on and quickly just plug in 300 buses, I don't know that our grid would be able to take it. And so, the next one is really what you just heard in the last panel. It's really about the electric vehicle infrastructure. Because to some extent, is that our responsibility? But we recognize now that as the ecosystem, we need to address that as well with our utility partners. And so we also know that we're going to need better battery technology out of these vehicles. Some of these vehicles are not really lasting, 10, 12 hours. It also depends on the loads and what you do with them, and also some of these batteries degrade over time. We talked a little about the electric grid and what that means. How are the substations? How are we preparing for that? And again, are we really truly being green and efficient? I think that is a topic that is going to come up more and more, because the notion that we're going to go all electric and just create a downstream impact and have the fossil fuel plants just crank it up is probably not the solution to really being green. And so we got to look at how we're going to really measure, are we really using green energy? Because just because you went electric and just created a demand downstream or upstream might not be where we really want to go. And so what I want to tell you is, the Jacksonville Transportation Authority is not just your everyday transportation authority. We are thinking boldly, we're thinking strategically. We think from a perspective of innovation and how to lean in, whether it's our complete streets, whether it's TOD, whether it's how we build roads and bridges. It's about the ecosystem for us. It's about how we are thinking how we're going to better the lives of the community and the folks here in Northeast Florida and Jacksonville. And it's really anchored for us when we talk about automated, connected, electric, and shared. It's really anchored in what we are doing in the ultimate urban circulator and the U2C. And so we will continue to lean in. We continue to work collaboratively with all of you and our partners as we look forward and really bringing this to fruition. So, thank you. And please join me in welcoming Greg to the stage. Greg, you have the floor.
Thank you. Certainly a lot of exciting things happening at JTA. So today, I want to talk to you a little bit about, first, who THEA is, second, the playing field that we're working on, but three, where we're headed and why we're headed that way. So let me first talk about who is THEA.
Connections drive us. We connect with loved ones, with best friends, and even with some not so best friends. We connect what's above with who's below, from downtown to out of town. And when you have a transportation agency whose mission is centered on investing in the local community, you get spaces to gather, partnerships that create connected and safer ways to travel, and dependable, seamless commutes. Coming together to create a brighter future for our communities. As Tampa's growth continues to trend upward, THEA is looking ahead and implementing forward-thinking approaches to help you travel with ease, connecting you to work, play, fun, pets, friends, family, and neighbors.
So as someone who's been in this business as long as I have, we are not your grandfather's Expressway Authority. And we're also centered around a community of Tampa Bay that is not your grandfather's Tampa Bay. We're growing. By 2045, Tampa's population will be close to 500,000. That's almost 30% growth since 2020. It's growing daily and daily, and we're changing. I heard a stat the other day that really shocked me. The median age in the city of Tampa is 33 years old. Pretty amazing when you think about the history of Tampa. From a wage standpoint, we're growing. We rank third in the US where pay is rising the fastest. But we also have a really high quality of life in Tampa. I just spent my first year here, first year of my 52 years on this earth, and I didn't have to deal with snow, so I'm very thankful. And when I come into Tampa, I hadn't really spent a lot of time there. In fact, when I came down to speak to the board about coming to join THEA, it was the first time I'd ever been in downtown Tampa. I came downtown, I talked to the board, and I walked around the city and I saw what was happening. The whole playing field was changing around our expressway. And we needed to be there to support that growth and be part of that positive story. And what I saw was this really cool, vibrant community and an opportunity to be part of its future. So when you dig into who we are as THEA, a big part of what I looked at when I came here was what we accomplished with our CV pilot. You know, being one of the 3 US DOT designated sites, we had a real opportunity. And, you know, it was very different for me. You know, coming from Maryland DOT, where we took a different approach in the technology. You know, we very much focused on the regulatory side, the policy side, the implementation side, and trying to be a place where industry could come and do what they did. But we took a back seat to implementation. THEA very clearly, at that point, had taken a role, a driver's seat in implementation. You know, a $27 million project, first real-time data production program. We delivered exactly what we said we were going to deliver in that pilot. And I think if they had to ask me one thing I was most proud of, I think that's part of it. You know, 1,100 vehicles equipped, 10 HART buses, 8 streetcars, and 48 roadside units, continuing to be part of the ecosystem that we serve. But what did we get from it? You know, 17 collisions prevented, 21 pedestrian crashes avoided, 19 red light violation warning issued, you know, 14 wrong-way drivers. That's critical for an expressway like us. You know, it's the ability to communicate to someone in our program that there's a wrong-way driver on our system that they can't see or even experience for miles, gives them the ability to understand and react. 20,000 safety advisories issues, and I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. But we designed our program so that we could provide the people on our system the best information possible to help in their trip and make their lives a lot safer. And when we did some surveys at the end of it, we found that 60% of the people in our program had a less stressful commute. And I couldn't help but think about that when, you know, years ago when the emergence of probe data was coming out and we were just as an industry starting to integrate that probe data into our VMS boards to publish travel times. And at that time I was working in the DC Baltimore traffic area where it would routinely take you 45 minutes to drive 5 miles. And people were saying that, okay, it's easier to drive 45 minutes for 5 miles if I know it's going to take me that long. So communication and information is really valuable, not only to make the system safer, but to reduce things that add stress to your commute. Because when you're stressed and when you have a lot of unknowns, drivers do stupid things. And so if we can reduce that stress and make their trip a little bit calmer, then maybe they'll make smarter decisions. But we needed to take this and figure out where we were going to go in the future. So one of the really cool things I discovered when I got to THEA is, you know, I came in, I started meeting with the team and looking harder at our work program. And I saw that we were getting ready to advertise. We had just finished a Selman West extension project above Gandy Boulevard in South Tampa. We were getting ready to advertise a project that was going to go from around the downtown core of Tampa to the beginning of that west extension. And then we had another project in the PD&E process that was going to go from the downtown core to the east side of Tampa towards an area called Brandon. And I looked at that and I said, well, what I'm seeing here is we're essentially going to rebuild the entire expressway in 10 years. 10's pretty aggressive, probably more like 12 or 15. It's going to take some time. And my first thought was, oh my God, that's a really big challenge. And then I remember kind of feeling this big smile across my face because I'm thinking, oh my God, what a real opportunity to rebuild and rebuild it differently and rebuild it in a way that can be very foundational for what we're trying to achieve in the future. So we are very clearly investing in innovation, and I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. But we're really thinking about what that next generation transportation system will be and what we can do to be part of it. So we're investing in innovation, not only as an organization and as a culture. You know, of course, we had $27 million in our CV pilot, which ended at the end of last month, and we're continuing that project. So now it's no longer our CV pilot, it's just the CV program. And we're going to push forward, and we're going to continue to invest in that technology. But we're also investing in ITS and smart systems. We're investing in that next generation of tolling infrastructure. And we're investing equally underneath of our expressway as we are on top of our expressway. I learned very quickly when I moved to Florida that shade is a commodity. And when you have an elevated expressway, we have a lot of shade. And that's something we can provide for the community. In that video, you saw bike and pedestrian paths. You saw a dog park. That dog park is right outside my office. I look out the window. If you're having a bad day, it's always easy to walk out to the dog park because they're always happy to see you. And so we believe in those types of community investments. We believe that our expressway is an integral part of this community, and we want to make sure that we're investing in our community as part of it. So we're really committed to a lot of different things. But we're committed to rebuilding that expressway and foundationally laying out what that future of transportation will be. So over the past year, we've been working really hard on not only the plans for that, but as part of a strategic plan to understand what that system will be in 2040 and what we will be in 2040 as part of that. So we've really laid out several areas that we think are really important for us, and we're going to start laying that vision out and really starting to put some structure around it and start moving towards that. First and foremost, we want to amplify and diversify what we provide to the community. It's critical. We're really good at what we do, and we want to amplify it and provide more of it. But we also want to diversify. We talk a lot about ACES, and I'm sure ACES has been talked a lot about these last few days. You know, automated. I like to throw another A in there called adaptable, because I believe that there are parts of our system that function differently on different days. And the ways that we can use our technology and our systems to make it adaptable, I think, is critical. So automated and adaptable, connected. How we're connecting with the city street grid, the FDOT system, how we're connecting with all the systems around us. Electric, another area we're going to diversify. You know, we're laying out plans for electric vehicle charging stations integrated into our network and that technology, not only as part of the community, but as part of what we're providing for our customers. And shared. We're also looking really hard at ways that we can provide things like mobility hubs and mobility centers around our city. We own a lot of land in the city, and we want to use that land for the good of the system and the transportation network, but also for the community. You know, the second thing we wanted to focus on was being data-driven. So why? Why do we want to be data-driven? Well, it's really three reasons. One, first and foremost, I am a gigantic data geek. So I love data, and I look at it, and I read it with my coffee in the morning, and I read it with a cocktail at night, but I just love data. So I'm constantly looking at it because I believe it tells us a story. The second reason that we need to be data-driven is really from my experiences. So, you know, my previous job was the Secretary of Transportation for Maryland. It was a real privilege to have that job, but I had to lead the Port of Baltimore and BWI Airport and our transit systems and our highway systems through the global pandemic. And one of the first things I had to do in that job is cut $2 billion from the capital program. What I found very quickly in those circumstances was that the programs that were the most heavily entrenched in data were the ones that were the most resilient and the ones that could make progress in times of crisis, because we never know when the next one is going to come. And then really the third reason is I believe that the greater 360-degree view that we can get of our customer and our system, the better we can serve them. Earlier in this presentation, we talked about thousands and thousands of safety warnings and speed warnings and those types of things that we were getting from our CV pilot. What a tremendous data source for us when our pilot participants can tell me parts of our system where we're having those near misses that we maybe didn't have a data set for before. Where I can find out exactly where wrong-way drivers are coming in, or exactly where we have people that are speeding too much on our system, that previously maybe it would take a crash or a tragic crash to really learn that. It allows us to take that data and learn more about our system and where we can be more preventative. The third area that we really want to focus on in our strategic efforts are the community. It's really about our community. We, by policy, invest 100% of our toll revenue back into the Tampa Bay community. And so that's investing in the space underneath. We have one dog park. We're getting ready to build another one. We're building a series of pocket parks and active uses. We've got a long stretch of the Expressway on the backside of Tampa in between Ybor City and Channelside, where we're looking at things like pickleball courts and active uses for the community. Because we believe, one, that's a real community asset, but we also believe that if you very intentionally use the space under your expressway to connect the communities on either side of it, you add value and you become part of the community. And then the fourth area that we really, really are focused on is building that highway of the future, building that system of the future. Now, we heard a lot, we heard from the Futurist this morning. We heard a little bit in JTA's presentation about, none of us really know what that highway of the future is, or what that roadway of the future is, or what that system of the future is. But I will tell you my perspective on it. There are probably 25 different paths that we can take. I believe that we don't know what the highway of the future is, but I also believe that we need to start building it now. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Sometimes you have to build the plane while you're flying it, and we need to make those investments now because the opportunity is now. As we're rebuilding our expressway, we're very focused on what that is. So we want to be not only community focused, but when I look around the room at these faces and the people that are here and some of the presentations that I've seen over the last few days, we want to be the place that you all come to when you have that big idea. We want to be the place where you come to try and think, how can this work? If you look at all of us up here, the scale of where we are, we're a great test bed. We can innovate. We can innovate in a way that is harder for the bigger systems. So we want to be that place, that innovative space for this industry, because we believe that it's foundational for the system that our kids and our grandkids are going to use. So we don't know where we're headed, but we're going to go there anyway. And that's why we're here. So thanks for having us. So I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you. Good morning. Sometimes I feel like it's afternoon because there's so much information that we have been bombarded with over the last 24 to 48 hours that it's just trying to catch up. I just want to say to begin with, thank you to Senator Brandis for all of the dedication you have for this state and for our transportation ideas and policies and just where we're going into the future. Working with our partner agencies, it's just really amazing to see where Florida is compared to other states. I'm a 9th generation Floridian, and my family's been around for a very long time, and to see from the rural parts of the state to the urban parts of the state, just the changes and the preparations that we all are making is incredible. So the Central Florida Expressway Authority is a regional, we're a regional transportation agency located in Central Florida, serving 5 county jurisdictions. We have 125 miles of centerline expressways, and we're working on approximately 30 more additional miles. It's in some sort of the planning and development phase. Our vision and mission is to provide our region with a world-class integrated mobility network. Tolling is how we deliver these projects and how we partner with our agencies and people like you in the community. Our customers are our first priority. So tolling facilities offer a unique opportunity for emerging transportation technologies, such as the ones that we've all been discussing over the last day or so. The expressway authorities in Florida have a long history of being early adopters and having the willingness to invest in new ideas that are making our expressway safer as well as more reliable solutions for our communities and for the customers that choose our roadways. So I want to share with you a project that we have happening now. And imagine in a world where vehicles could charge while in motion. Specifically, and we've been talking about this, there's continuous themes throughout this conference, but specifically electric, possibly autonomous trucks to be charged to deliver goods and services while they are on the roadway. So CFX has partnered with a leading nationally recognized research center called Aspire. And Aspire is advancing sustainability through powered infrastructure for roadway electrification. This group is located within the Utah State University. They're funded by the National Science Foundation. And our Lake Orange Expressway is a new 5-mile greenfield project that's going to connect two of the fastest growing areas in our region. Nearly 1 mile of this expressway will have the in-lane charging technology that we will be piloting and the researchers will be monitoring. So this technology is already being used, induction technology. You do it to charge your phones, right? And the in-lane charging system is also proven technology already. It's being used all over the world, or in different parts of the world. They came to us in our region, and specifically in Florida, because of our weather. So really what this research is going to do for the projects and hopefully adoption, and it'll change as we go through the process, but really is to refine the efficiencies, that the opportunities that this offers. So now I want to share with you a video, and one video is the concept of the actual Lake Orange Expressway project, and the second is video will show how the in-lane charging would work. Smart cars need smart infrastructure. Recently, our CFX board, and I do want to take a moment to recognize we have a couple of members of our board here, CJ Mayer as well as Commissioner Lee Constantine. So I just want to shout out to them for their vision of helping move us forward. But our board recently adopted our 2045 master plan. And traditionally, transportation projects and planning efforts have focused on our existing system needs as well as potential new corridors. This time, we knew we had to take a different approach. Technology and innovation is changing rapidly. So we kind of turned our master plan on its head. And we said, okay, our projects, we know what those things look like, but we need to be prepared for the future. So now all of our 2045 master plan capital projects will have the future in mind. This is an example of what I mean by smart infrastructure at CFX. We had a series of board workshops recently, or over the last year or so, where we brought in experts to present to our board ACEs, connected infrastructure, new technologies, interoperability. And so we really took a deep dive into those conversations and how we might start considering these opportunities as we are looking to 2045, and some of these things are already happening today. I'll give you an example. As we are planning our roadway expansion and capacity improvements, we're actually putting in a program called part-time shoulder running, where when there are incidents, we're building up the shoulders of our highways, and when there are incidents on our facilities or there's evacuations, those shoulders can be used to move people faster through those areas. And our ITS group is a big part of that conversation and implementation of that project. So we're really excited about what the future holds. Our teams, which include not only our staff, but our consultants and our contractors, are really going to have to dive deep into staying in touch with the trends so that we can continue to deliver on our mission, which is to provide the mobility network for our region that offers economic prosperity and improves the quality of life for our customers. So now I want you to imagine that this expressway and the cars on it are electric and they are charging while they are driving. This could be the future, and we all have to be ready for that. As we serve our communities and we offer a utility that the average person does not think about, it is upon us to be ready. And I believe that's what this conference is about, is for us to be ready, to be planned for things that we may not know that's happening yet. I will leave you with this. It is a great time to be in the business of transportation. Thank you.
Susan, do we have time for questions? We do not have time for any questions. All right, well, please join me in a round of applause for everybody. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this morning's presentations. Our breakout sessions will begin promptly in 15 minutes. Please be back here at 1 p.m. for the closing session of the 2022 FAV Summit, where we'll have a sneak peek at next year's meeting in Tampa. Thank you.